Thomas Pynchon again.
Oh yeah.
Your favourite author, yeah. So yeah, I talked about Mason And Dixon and Inherent Vice, which are two probably the most famous Thomas Pynchon novels, apart from Gravity's Rainbow, probably the most famous ones. But the one I've read's more like a deep cut.
Okay.
I read Vineland, his fourth novel. With Mason And Dixon, because it's so acclaimed, people have heard of that. Inherent Vice was turned into a Paul Thomas Anderson film, of which we've talked about numerous times at length.
We never seem to escape it.
There's no way to escape that. But yeah, so Vineland is probably the first one that I'll be talking about, where most people who are into literature will probably not have heard of it or read it. Like, you've never heard of Vineland, have you? No.
No, I have actually.
You have?
The book's on my shelf.
Oh yeah, I gave you my old copy.
No,
yeah,
no. But before I knew of Thomas Pynchon,
yeah,
no idea.
Yeah, it's much more of a cult novel, and a lot of what it is goes into sort of the making of it in a kind of way. So what happened was that Thomas Pynchon was very active in the 60s and early 70s. He released 3 books and some short stories, all of which were acclaimed as V, which is seen as a classic, The Crying of Lot 49, which is seen as a classic even though Thomas Pynchon doesn't like it, and Gravity's Rainbow, which when it came out was absolutely huge. It was either seen as a terrible work of art or like the greatest post-World War II novel there is. Still has that kind of reputation, but it was like a literary event. It was massive, it was a huge postmodern thing. But then, what he did, instead of following it up with Gravity's Rainbow 2, he went deep underground. He did nothing for 17 years. Didn't release like a book review. He didn't release a book. He didn't release some short story. There was a short story collection, but it was just a collection of ones that were written before V. So for 17 years, no one had heard anything from Thomas Pynchon at all. Apparently, they were trying to...
Was he like the Terrence Malick of the book world?
He was like Terrence Malick of the book world. He just went completely underground. Apparently, after Gravity's Rainbow, a lot of journalists tried to find things out about him and were completely unsuccessful.
Oh, right.
So it might have been that drove him to not do anything, but because he's a recluse and no one's ever given an interview with him, no one will know what he did for those 17 years. But then after 17 years, he returned with Vineland, which, as you may be able to tell, is a modest book in terms of book length. It's only 385 pages long, which compared to the about 800 of Gravity's Rainbow is practically like a short story for Pynchon. It's also incredibly short compared to the other book of his I'm reading at the moment, Against the Day, which is 1,215 pages long. Yeah, so like Vineland, I think is his second or third longest book. It's definitely, I think the only one that's shorter is The Crying of Lot 49, which is only 120 pages. But yeah, so it's like, it confused a lot of people when it came out because he was following up this huge masterpiece that he left 17 years with a book which is it's not like a globe-trotting adventure. It's more homespun, more about family than the insane Gravity's Rainbow. So the actual plot of Vineland is he's like a faded hippie. It's 1983, the first term of Reagan, and Zoid Wheeler lives with his daughter Prairie. The mother isn't there. They're in their own home, and they seem to be contented for a while. Zoid lives off of Zoidberg. Zoid lives off of disability checks.
Okay.
That's what's so great about the novel, actually, the complex characterisation of the hippie movement, because Zoid, who you learn most of the stuff about later on, he is a hippie, but he has to survive off government checks, which is obviously they're anti-government, so there's complex stuff going on there. This actually has my favourite introduction of any Thomas Pynchon book. What happens is Zoid is sent a letter saying that he needs to do something crazy, or else he won't be able to get his mental health check. So what he does is he goes out in a dress and jumps through a window.
Oh.
And he rings up like the media beforehand. So they but the way it's built up and everything is absolutely great. Like it makes this, it's like a really whimsical, bizarre opening. But the way it's done is really, it's a really great opening. It's quite funny. It's action-packed. It's certainly different from the beginning of Gravity's Rainbow, which is quite a. I haven't read it for a while, but I think it's of the actual rocket itself in motion, which is, and it's also that's set in World War II, so much more serious than a man in a dress jumping through a window in order to support himself. But from there, what happens is. A figure from the past of Zoid, who is, they all have very complex names, Brock Vond, who is he's like an FBI agent, like anti-drugs, and it turns out that Brock and Zoid's ex-wife, Frenesse, I believe it's so complex keeping these characters' names in there because they all have ridiculous names like Frenesse, Zoid, Prairie. But yeah, so his ex-girlfriend, his ex-wife left Zoid for Brock, and then Brock is now isn't in contact with Frenesse, so he comes after Zoid. So that's sort of the setting up of the novel. They have to like go underground, and then from there, Prairie, who's not seen her mother for I think 15 years or so, she learns more about her mother because she's back into this sort of hippie milieu that's in there. So a much more tight, compact book than the sort of sprawling masterworks that it was known for in the 60s and 70s. This one is also the beginning of what I like to call the familial period of Thomas Pynchon. Like the message of Inherent Vice, Mason and Dixon, and a little bit of what I've read of Against the Day seems to be heavily towards sort of the value of family against other things. Like they tend to be about damaged characters, usually who have like a broken family relationship, putting like a family together of themselves. In Mason and Dixon, it was Mason's wife had died, so he was trying to make a mock family with the two sons he had and the family that he had around him. This continues it because it's all about the main character is a single father trying to look after his daughter and the challenges that he has with that. It's a much more emotional book than the 60s ones, which were more known for their zany plots and sort of they were more thematically interesting than they were emotional, and more like there's an amazing bit in Gravity's Rainbow. It's the Byron the Bulb section. It's quite famous actually in terms of postmodern literature. It's about a bulb who never dies. He's a never-ending light bulb, and he escapes Germany up a Japanese businessman's arse because he's been like a prostitute finds him, and then he gets out of Germany into America. And it's about existentialism. Like this bulb can never die, and he's a rogue bulb. He fights for bulb rights. It's really, really dense. It's like a 15-minute page using this bulb as an allegory for the human condition, existentialism, and fighting for rights and things. It's such a weird thing. But you don't get anything like that in Vineland. Vineland is much more focused on a central bunch of characters. But what the book does brilliantly is, from about the first 100 pages, you think it's going to be all about Prairie and Zoid, and it's all going to be set in the 80s. But what happens is that Prairie hides out with these ninjas because she meets up with another character whose name I can't remember now. But she meets up with this other character in this sort of ninja hiding space, and then the other character knew Frenesse when she was much younger. So the whole novel then becomes a complicated flashback within flashback structure, where this character is talking to Prairie about Frenesse. And that becomes a sort of portrait of the 60s. So then most of the novel, about a good 150 pages, as soon as you get past about 130 pages, is all set in this shifting flashback framework, where it's all about the characters when they were younger. So the novel makes you believe that it's going to be all about Zoid and Prairie and them trying to evade Brock, but that's not actually returned to until the last chapter, which takes up about 60 pages right at the end. So it brilliantly subverts your expectations based on the beginning. And also, it actually, if you've read other Pynchon books, later ones, like Inherent Vice, which is like a detective story, like a shaggy dog story, about this guy trying to solve a mystery. That's what you might think this is going to be. You might think it's Zoid going out of his way to solve this mystery of why Brock's after him and trying to evade that. But it's not that novel at all. It's a much sadder, more contemplative novel, all about the effects of the drug war and about the fact that the hippie dream of the 60s was never really sustainable. There's great bits where it's all about this Frenesse was part of a radical revolutionary movement called 24 frames per second, which they were like a video crew taking like films of student riots and things. So it's like this brilliantly gets into sort of the minutiae of like revolutionary groups through this 24 frames per second. You'd like it actually. There's a lot of arcania about film and Japan.
Oh yeah. Oh.
There's actually a really great bit where the first flashback is framed as like a business meeting with this Japanese businessman, and it's really, really weird actually, because what happens is they find Godzilla's footprint in like the parking lot of where he is, and then they find this Godzilla footprint and they have to deal with that. It's not confirmed it's Godzilla, but through the data you know it is So Godzilla is in this book.
That's a good selling point.
Yeah, it's really weird because this is like it's a transitional work between early Pynchon, wacky, and later Pynchon, where it's more about, as I say, family, or the themes are more about disenfranchisement, America. His early novels feel like the work of like a crazy young man, high in his room, writing down anything that he can think of, trying to get everything packed in. The later work feel like an old, sort of contented man trying to sum up the entirety of America. Like the book I'm reading now, Against the Day, I've only read the first couple hundred pages, which I'll get into this, but so much of it is about wage slavery, the like abuse of like people on the bottom by the top, all that kind of stuff. The genesis of that is in here, but you still get remnants of old Pynchon. Like what happens is with the Japanese businessman, when there's the Godzilla foot there, he ends up going to a hotel, and there's a woman there, DL, that's who it is, the person who's Frenesse's friend. She's sent to assassinate Brock Vond, who looks exactly like this Japanese businessman, and she ends up giving this Japanese businessman like a touch of death. Like, you know, like in The Simpsons where he's like, does that, he'll die in a week, it's like that. And then like through that she ends up having to look after this Japanese businessman who lives inexplicably long. But it's all this kind of, like, that's a wacky idea, isn't it? Oh look, it's like a parody of like ninja films. So you've got a lot of that going on, as well as this sort of really sad story of this man who's trying to deal with raising this daughter and trying to get over the fact that his ex-wife has left him, like, mysteriously. It actually has a really great ending as well. What happens is that he loses his house, does Zoid. A lot of it is to do with like I see it as being a novel about the sort of losers of the war on drugs. It's pretty interesting actually. It's talking about the failure of the war on drugs in like 1990.
Oh yeah.
Because that kind of stuff, like I've been watching The Wire recently.
Oh yes.
Which is obviously the great masterwork. I know you've not seen it, but it's probably the greatest work ever made about the war on drugs and how it's just a colossal failure. But there are stuff in this which feels almost as resonant as that, even though and like obviously this was like first by a good decade. It's not as obviously penetrating as The Wire, because The Wire is 60 hours long and has like a massive cast and explores it from every single run. This is just about like the victims of that. Like Zoid never does anything wrong in the book, but throughout, because of the fact he's an ex-hippie and that the FBI agent doesn't like him, his house that he built himself is destroyed. His family, he has to move and relocate to Vineland. So you've got all this sort of destruction of who he is just because of the fact that he's an ex-hippie and he has no real power against the FBI, who've given this massive budget to fight the war on drugs. But the ending is really sweet actually, because what happens is Zoid ends up hiding out with Frenesse's new husband, and they form like an ad hoc family. Or it's implied at the end that they formed an ad hoc family. Like his daughter Prairie is now like friends with her essentially stepbrothers and things. So it's suggesting these characters can create a family of their own as an infrastructure against the war on drugs and the fact that they're destroying the family they have, but they manage to come together and create a family of their own. The thing that I think about this that doesn't make it like a masterwork of Pynchon is it is slightly like unfocused.
Right.
Even at 385 pages, it's like half the length of Mason and Dixon. It doesn't feel as focused as Mason and Dixon. Like it's like there are a lot of diversions and just a lot of like mile-wide digressions. Like it'll go in one place, then it'll tell you everything about a character before he does something, and it's just got so much detail in there. I think it detracts from it a little bit. Not every detail feels like a part of a grand masterwork. Some of it feels like it's just there to amuse Thomas Pynchon rather than to make a big thematic point. But it's still a great novel. It's still a 10 out of 10. Underrated just because it isn't like trying to say the big it's not like it isn't as crazy or like impenetrable as Gravity's Rainbow, and it's not as acclaimed as a lot of his other work, but I think it deserves a reappraisal. It got some positive reviews, but as I said, just because you follow some up after 17 years, it's always going to be divisive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like Finnegan's Wake.
Oh yeah.
That took 17 years to write.
Oh.
After Ulysses.
Yes.
Exactly 17 years, so same amount of time as Finnegan's Wake, but Finnegan's Wake is insane. Have you ever read Finnegan's Wake, or do you know what it is?
I know of it.
It's written in sort of Irish slang.
Oh, okay.
It's impenetrable.
Yeah.
Like it's all like.
Didn't he write for Dubliners as well?
Yeah, The Dubliners is his first novel.
Yeah, I've read bits of The Dubliners and I've read bits of Ulysses.
Dubliners is really great. It's not hard to read at all. It's just a bunch of short vignettes about like late 1800, early 1900 life in Ireland.
Yeah. No, I like all that.
Yeah.
Ulysses, I tried it when I was in college and I wasn't expecting it.
No.
At all.
No.
But there are scholars of Ulysses that have never read Ulysses all the way through.
Yeah. Well, Finnegan's Wake is like a more difficult version of Ulysses.
Yeah.
It's like at least Ulysses it's legible. Like Finnegan's Wake it's hard to explain. I'll have to bring a copy or something just to show you the print. It's just because it's all like just complex slang. But yeah, so he followed up Ulysses with that, like an even more impenetrable novel. Thomas Pynchon went the other way. He made like a tight thriller rather than like a huge. Like you'd expect him to follow it up with Against the Day, something like that, where it's absolutely huge. Instead, followed it up with Vineland.
Maybe he was just getting himself warmed up.
Well, yeah, his next novel was Mason and Dixon, 800 pages. The one after that, 1,200 pages. He got warmed up. It's been 17 years. It's been long enough.
If you're not written for a while, it might take a bit of time to get back in that zone, I imagine.
Yeah.
Like, I'll start off on a little book. 300 pages will do, and then I'll move up to 1,000.
Have you heard the... I'm just trying to find quotes and stuff. Have you heard the theory that he is J.D. Salinger?
No.
Because J.D. Salinger stopped writing at the exact point where Thomas Pynchon started, and both of them are recluses. No one knows what either one looks like after a certain period, and they both would have been of similar ages. So
Did you know that J.D. Salinger's son played Captain America?
No.
At one point.
No.
How weird is that?
That's truly bizarre. Which version? What time and stuff?
It was an unreleased one in the 90s.
Really?
I went straight to video, I think.
Yeah, but yeah, there's some beautiful sort of prose in this though. Like some of the best ones. Like I thought this was a great one. Again, it's using a lot of like hippie sort of slang and stuff. A lot of people now. I read on the AV Club a few reviews of modern stuff, and people were saying like what their favourite one. Well, usually Vineland's usually quite low down because I think people see it as being dated. I personally don't think it's dated. I think it's a comment on that kind of 60s sort of environment. Like I don't think you could read it and think that he's saying hippiedom is great. It's not Easy Rider.
No, yeah.
Which we keep taking a bashing to in these reviews, but. That's a terrible film.
That's awful.
It's the exact worst kind of representation of hippiedom there is.
Yeah, I watched Easy Rider when I was in uni, and the guy was like, "You see, who needs Steven Spielberg? But he got Easy Rider," and I was like, "Steven Spielberg any day."
Easy Rider is terrible. But yeah, so this is a bit of like a great piece of writing. Zoid's so this is him. He's ruminating on his ex-wife. So it's Zoid's dream album someday would be an anthology of talk songs for male vocalists called "Not Too Mean to Cry." He'd arrived in this recurring fantasy at the point where he'd taken advertising space late at night on the tube with a toll-free number flashing over little 5-second samples of each tune, not only to sell records but also on the chance that Frenesse, up late some 3 a.m. out of some warm Mr. Wonderful's bed, would happen to pop the tube on, maybe to chase the ghost away, and there'd be Zoid at the keyboard in some outrageous full-colour tux someplace along the Vegas Strip, backed by a full house orchestra, and she'd know as the title scrolled by, "Are you lonesome tonight? One for my baby, since I fell for you," that every one of those disconsolate oldies was all about her. So it's a much more sad novel than his early ones, because there is a heart of, like, the heart of the novel is about this broken family trying to move on from that. But yeah, it's a really great novel. It's not as good as Mason and Dixon, but it is better than Inherent Vice. It's because ultimately it's just more original. As I say, my problem with Inherent Vice is that everybody's done a book about the end of the 60s dream set in the end of the 60s.
Joe Bloggs that works for Butchers down the road's done that.
Exactly, everyone. It is the easiest way to do end of the 60s work, isn't
commentary
it?
Thing, yeah.
Yeah. The dream was unsustainable. Quick, put it about a hippie in the end of the 60s. But yeah, because it is looking back at that and it has a more complex adult view of that kind of era, Vineland is a better book than Inherent Vice. So 10 out of 10 again. Really great book. Anyone who's not bought it and is a Thomas Pynchon fan, buy it. It's really good. Anyone who says it's dated, I disagree. It's ultimately just as good as some of his other work, but you aren't going to go in expecting a masterpiece. This is the thing, I suppose, with, like, you brought up James Joyce. He only wrote 4 novels. Dublin is a short story collection.
Short story collection, yeah, it's a novel there.
Yeah, so he wrote, that and Portrait of a Young Man and Portrait of a Young Artist, isn't it? You know that one, Stephen Daldry, yeah. Ulysses Finnegan's Wake. So yeah, 4 novels, all masterworks. Thomas Pynchon's got some, he's got stuff like Vineland or The Crying of Lot 49, like littler novels. Ones that a Thomas Pynchon fan will buy and get some out of, but probably won't appeal to sort of mass audiences. This would be a terrible novel, I think, to start on, because if you're expecting, like Gravity Rainbow type of insanity, you're just not going to get it from here. There's still some craziness, and it is a really interesting one just for his evolution, just to see how he changed, how he went from Gravity's Rainbow to Mason and Dixon. A lot of the answers are in here. Because he's an author who, that's the only way you can find out anything about him. Read the books. You can't exactly just go into, you can't search Wikipedia. I'd love that. Well, I took the 17 years just to do a bit of landscape gardening. Took a couple of odd jobs. That was all. I just wanted to really get away from it all.
Hung out with JD.
Hung out with JD Salinger, my best bro. We went down to the bars every night.
That's what inspired the relationship between Mason and Dixon in my novel Mason and Dixon. It was the relationship that I shared with JD.
With JD, yeah. The learned talking dog is actually Miss Charles Bukowski.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, Vineland, great book, and I'll have another little bit on a Thomas Pynchon book very shortly.